Recording.
Yeah, I'm gonna now. There we go. Good morning, Carl. How are you today?
Good, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Glad you're here again this morning. And
Yep. And by the
welcome
way,
to.
I want to get it out of the way real quickly. Happy birthday.
Oh, geez, Carl. We had this all planned out. Okay.
I know.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And boy, my social media and everything's been blowing up this morning. That's for sure. But hey, well, welcome to Multifamily Unplugged, where we get into raw and unscripted conversation about multifamily investing and property management. Two topics that deserve in-depth, no-fluff conversation, straight factual data that you can turn off the show and start to use immediately in your own business. You know, I like this conversation that we have every week, every Saturday morning, 10 o'clock, raw and unscripted, because you know what? Social media has just taken away from us so much of that. You know, I wonder how many of our listeners remember a world where there was no internet and no Facebook, when they had to say to somebody, hey, I'll meet you by the front door of the Hyatt at 3 o'clock and we can go find a place to sit and talk. Who does that anymore? Anybody?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, substantial things in life matter, but nobody's talking about them anymore, which is just absolutely crazy to me, right? But let me talk about this real quick. Today's sponsor for our show is the Multifamily Global Summit, where on October 15th through the 18th, you can join us for 3 days of networking, education, and fun, where we'll be joined by 20 of the top multifamily real estate investment specialists from across the country, bringing you tips and tricks on how to grow your multifamily real estate investment and property management business. So go to multifamilyglobalsummit.com to register for the event. Let's talk about today, though. Today, we're going to be joined by Lamell McMorris. Lamell's a community activist and a civil rights leader who has single-handedly changed some of Chicago's worst streets. You know what? I want to tell a quick story, Carl, about how I actually met Lamell. Happened to be sitting on a Sunday morning reading the Chicago Tribune, and all of a sudden I read this article that's like a 3-page article in the real estate section about this gentleman who is working in some of the toughest neighborhoods in the city. And I'm like, man, you know, what does he see that others don't see? So immediately my thought is, let me reach out. You know how big I am about team building and networking and how I coach people around that. Well, what I did was I reached out to Lamell, and he got back to me. For a guy who's so busy, I was surprised he got back to me. And but we set a time, and we've had a couple of conversations, and I'm real happy that he's going to be on our show today. I think our listeners are going to benefit, and a lot of people are going to just gain a lot of knowledge and a lot of insight from what he has to say. Let me read his bio a little bit. Lamell McMorris is a visionary, a leader working at the intersection of civil rights and business. He's a founding principal of Greenlining Realty, a real estate redevelopment firm aimed at readdressing the effects of redlining. McMorris is a lifelong advocate of civil, economic, and social rights, currently serving on the national boards of the National Action Network, the National Urban League, and Rainbow Push Coalition, and having previously served on the national board of the NAACP and as an executive director and COO of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He's a founder and CEO of the Washington, D.C. based strategic advisory firm, Phase 2 Consulting. Hey, Lamell, welcome this morning. And would you please say hi to our listeners?
Hey, Mike, how are you? And how you doing? Carl, very nice to meet you as well. And to Chris and all your listeners who are on the line, it's an absolute pleasure to be with you this morning. I am very much excited about learning and listening, even more than I will be talking and sharing. Particularly, though, I'm struck by something that you mentioned in the introduction. You used the word single-handedly. And when I think about neighborhood transformation, I very much see it from a collective and collaborative standpoint. So I will not take credit for any of the work that we're trying to do single-handedly. There are a wonderful group of people, one who've been working in the neighborhood prior to my doing that, and who are doing great work as we speak, whether it's Pastor Corey Brooks over on the west side of Woodlawn through Project Hood, or Dory McWhorter and the YWCA of Chicago, my partner Sean Harden, who works with me every day on the ground, and Joe and the folks at Sunshine Gospel Ministry. So we're surrounded. And at Green Lining, we work with a chorus and a group of witnesses, and we're all collectively trying our best to revive and initiate a renaissance in the West Woodlawn section of Chicago South Side.
Nice. Well, listen, I just want to say that I'm honored that you're here. And, you know, I do mention, you know, you single-handedly, but there's got to be leadership, right? And you're a leader. And that's what I love about you, right? And, you know, quick story, I had a friend kind of correct me this week and had to remind me that it wasn't all me, that God had a lot to do with it. And it, you know, I know that that's your background, your philosophy, and where your faith is at also. And if it wasn't for us doing his mission, you know, some of this doesn't happen. So I'm grateful that you're here. But here's what I'd like you to do is tell us your backstory. Right?
Yeah.
Tell us how you got to this point and where you came from, if you would.
Yeah, so I grew up at 66 in Cottage Grove in Woodlawn, right at 742 East Marquette Road. And that building and location has been in my family for almost 8 decades. And as a kid growing up, you know, it was always an area that had its challenges. It's an area that clearly has been the result of a lack of investment, poor education infrastructure, low job and employment infrastructure, high crime and gang activities. But you can be in a place and not necessarily of it, and you can, with a good group of mentors and family, you can still, you know, rise out above and out of your circumstances. And so while I've done that, I've never been disconnected from my neighborhood. And so, yes, I went on to college in Atlanta and Morehouse, and then graduate school in New Jersey and in Princeton, New Jersey. And my core business is based in Washington, D.C., where I do advocacy in and around the federal government. I've always been engaged in civil rights and social justice issues. So it's not unusual for me to advocate for causes that, you know, are very near and dear. And I went home in 2016, stood on the porch of our building where we still own and we've lived for so long, and I saw some of the same vacant lots, you know, in front, and I saw some blighted buildings that had been there for a while, and yes, there has clearly been progress, but nowhere near the levels that we see in other parts of the city and even other parts of the area in Woodlawn and Hyde Park. And I just said, you know, heck, I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna jump in and do it myself. And when I say jump in and do it myself, I describe being an entrepreneur as someone that goes on top of a building, jumps off and figures out how they're gonna land and what's gonna happen when they land on the way down. So I did not have an extensive background in real estate development, but I didn't have an extensive background in government relations work and starting a firm in Washington, D.C. as well. But what I did know, and we talked about a little bit before we went on air live, that we're all only as good as the people that we surround ourselves with in business and in anything that we are attempting to do. And so I called up my buddy Sean Harden, who has worked in Chicago government, worked with lists, worked in and around housing and workforce development issues. And he's my childhood friend. And I said, hey, I can't do this without you. And you know your way around City Hall and the various departments and zoning. You know your way around the organizations that we'll need to partner with. And it started there. I said, look, I think that this issue is not solely because of or relegated to redlining, but it definitely at the heart of redlining, and that is where deliberate systemic lines and legal legislation around how and where not to invest in certain communities happen in communities like Woodlawn. I don't think it all stems from redlining, but I think a good chunk of why my community is still in this state that it's in, and other communities like it
Yep.
are
Hey,
still in the
Lamell,
position that they're. Yes.
I'm going to ask you to explain to our listeners what you mean by redlining, because there's
Yeah.
a couple of terms I think that don't get talked about anymore, and
Yeah.
redlining, blockbusting, and things like that, right? So explain that to our listeners so they understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, so about 40 or 50 years ago, banks and other financial institutions, particularly mortgage companies, drew red lines around certain communities that they did not deem worthy for investment or not credit worthy. Those communities, of course, were disproportionately Black communities and brown and poor. And what happens as a result of drawing those red lines around certain communities and not investing, then you created a tremendous homeownership gap and thus a tremendous wealth gap. And so when you don't have homeownership and investment and tax base increase and homeownership in communities, then you can't look at certain communities today and wonder why, the poor road infrastructure, poor school infrastructure, lack of businesses, low education rates, low unemployment rates. There's a direct correlation between these very systemic, deliberate, legal mechanisms that were put in place to draw red lines around certain communities to where we are today, which is why where I was headed and which is I'm glad you asked me to, further clarify, which is why we named the real estate company Greenlining, because where those red lines were drawn, we're trying to catalyze and spur investment in green line communities. And that means spurring home ownership, spurring investment in businesses and jobs, investing in the education core, investing in the health, because, these inequities, it's like a domino effect, right? Yeah. So if you've got inequities in one area, right, education, high crime rate, low jobs, then inevitably you're going to have healthcare disparities, you're going to have education disparities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, food deserts. And so, look, this is not going to be done by the way, and I think you've heard me say this, Mike, in our previous conversation, if you're truly serious about true neighborhood transformation, and this is nothing against some of your listeners and some of the work that they do, because some people, they see real estate as investment. They see you flip, you make money, you get out. Ours is a different spirit and mentality, in part because it's the neighborhood where I grew up, but coupled with it is because, I recognize the historic systemic mechanisms that were put in place to disenfranchise. So I recognize that, if we're truly serious about true neighborhood transformation, it's not going to get done by simply by building new homes on vacant lots or rehabbing blighted properties. If I do not have a 360-degree approach to spurring jobs, to getting the education infrastructure, to leveling the health inequities, the mental health, the apprenticeship, the trade, it is a holistic. And so I fully recognize for us at Greenlining, real estate development is but one vehicle that we choose to start a much larger and broader conversation.
You know, we're really in the people business, aren't we? And it's about
Yes.
development of people. And I'm so glad you bring the education piece up because I'm such an advocate of this. And this is what Carl and I do, you know, is we teach people. And I think that by building into people and teaching people skills, not only business skills, but personal skills. How do we become better at the core of who we are? That gives the opportunity for better jobs. Better jobs gives us the opportunity to grow and flourish more and to bless the community stakeholders around us, whether it's family, whether it's business owners, whoever it may be. And I think
Yes.
that your mission is just is phenomenal. Um, so what's the motivating factor in your life for all of this? Because this is a huge initiative, right? This is and I'm looking at the books on the shelves behind you, and some of the heroes there. You know, you got Harold Washington and Ali and Martin Luther, and
Yeah.
you know, listen, what's your motivating factor to go out and do this?
You know, I've always felt, I tell people you can almost draw, it's not necessarily a straight line, but you can draw a line from my childhood to what I'm doing now. As a matter of fact, Sean Harden, who is my childhood friend, and some of our other buddies in Chicago always joke because, you know how when you're teenagers and your kids and you're younger, everyone is going to the mall or doing something after school. And they always said, I was headed to a meeting. I was always going to some meeting about something. And so, you know, I'd like to think that I was very motivated by Harold Washington becoming the first, Black mayor of Chicago. And so I was always keenly aware of current events. That was a very inspirational, never did a certain segment of Chicago think that would ever happen, right? And so that was very moving. And so being involved in student government leadership and giving back was a big deal. I was very involved in my church as a kid. I was always at church, as a matter of fact. And so part of the ethic of my faith is to help and do for the least of these and always be engaged. So, and then I think it's also connected, Mike and Carl, to the whole entrepreneurial spirit, right? Because I like to see something from nothing develop into something. And what better place to watch something blossom and grow than in a place where that is historically, and in places that have historically been disenfranchised, where once they looked, right? So, I want to see the blocks in my neighborhood that once looked, vacant lots, weeds growing, all kind of other activity going on, where now there are actually new homes, a new energy, a new thrust, a neighborhood rising, if you will. I think it's all connected to, who and hopefully what I've always been.
You know,
It's interesting. It's
one
interesting you say that. Sorry, Mike, to interrupt.
no, go ahead,
You
Carl.
remind me of a very good friend of mine, a guy I went to college with. He's from New York City. Grew up in Fort Greene. I don't know if you're familiar with Fort
Oh
Greene.
yeah, very familiar with Fort Greene in Brooklyn.
Spanish Harlem, basically. And
Yeah.
very hardworking guy. His mom and dad came to America from Puerto Rico, with nothing. Did very well, raised 10 kids. And you remind me of my friend Danny. He's the oldest. They started with one bodega, right? And now they own a couple $100 million worth of real estate. And they bought
Yeah.
the lot across the street. And then they bought the burned out garage and turned it into a video store before Blockbuster, by the way. They were from the neighborhood. They were invested in the neighborhood. They cared about the neighborhood, and they improved the neighborhood. And it was an attitude, you know what I mean? And it was a tough neighborhood. I remember when we were in college in the early 80s, we used to go down there. I used to go down there with them. And I'm like, holy mackerel, this is a tough neighborhood. I grew up in Cleveland. There's some areas of Cleveland that are pretty tough. However, you go back there now, in that little 6-block radius from where his father's original stores, and they still own that building, is improved significantly. And it's not all, as you mentioned, it's not all due to Danny Barrero and his family, but he was part of that community, and he was part of the people that locked arms and said, we're gonna take care of our own little space here. So I really take my hat off to you, and you remind me of my friend.
No, no, thanks, Carl. But you know, and I appreciate that. But you hit on, you know, you said a lot in your comments. So one, the first point that you made, which I really welcome and challenge and invite your listeners today to do this. Drive down Cottage Grove. You know, in, let's say, between 61st and Cottage Grove, or even the Midway Plaisance right there, right at the University of Chicago. Drive south on Cottage Grove from about 55th, 57th to 66 and 67th in Cottage Grove. Look at the bones of that commercial corridor. And then turn in going west onto Marquette Road or 65th or 63rd. And then go drive on Division or Milwaukee, up on the north side, around Lincoln Park, etc. And tell me the difference.
Yeah.
It's the same bones. It's the same infrastructure. The major difference, Carl, that you said is one was deemed worthy of investment and one area has been deemed not worthy of investment. And look, here's the thing that was miraculous to me, because, you know, as a kid, I went downtown in Chicago, but do you realize until, and by the way, we didn't do any development or any new projects in my neighborhood until we started with my childhood home first and gut rehab my childhood home first. But do you know what's crazy? I didn't even realize until 2016, 2017, that if you go on the roof of my childhood home, I can see the downtown skyline. So how can you be that close, right, to all the investment, the business sector of a city and a community, that close to the transportation hub on the west of the Dan Ryan I-94 and to the east Lakeshore Drive, and have that proximity to transportation, both Chicago Transit Authority, rail, and that close to downtown, and be deemed unworthy of investment, right? And so, everything is there for my neighborhood to thrive just as others.
Yeah, my daughter, who's 16, goes to school with a girl. Her family lives at 61st and St. Lawrence. And last night she had a birthday party in Washington Park. So I was actually in Washington Park and drove that little area you just said. I literally drove that last night. And you go on the other side, just east of Cottage Grove, you got the university right there. You got Hyde Park right there. And
you see a different, it's like almost going to a different world, right? If you're in my corridor of West Woodlawn, as a matter of fact, I tell people from elected officials, et cetera, like, look, the same pole. As a matter of fact, a couple of months ago, a car ran into the pole. The same light pole in front of my childhood home has been there for almost 50, 60 years. So much so that if there's an accident and the city does come out, they twist the pole back up. You can still see the dent, and all they do is repaint it. If we cross right over Cottage Grove on the east side of Cottage, you got those fancy, nice black, the new headlamp on it. That's how stark the contrast is, and that's how close in proximity. And all I'm saying, by virtue of action and banging on the table, is that my area, south of 63rd, west of Cottage Grove, is worthy of the same investment that's happening in other parts of my community and in the city.
Couldn't agree with you more.
So a couple things that I just kind of wrote down, a couple of things that as you guys were talking. But first of all, that neighborhood and those South Side neighborhoods, some of the most beautiful architecture that you'll find anywhere in the city or in the country for that matter. Some of the gray stones and the brownstones. I mean, gorgeous, gorgeous architecture. And the other thing is, tell Lamell, how different is your initiative or what you're doing from what, you know, Magic Johnson's company does and what he started several years back, as far as, you know, going in and to neighborhoods and trying to bring some of the big boxes in, you know, the Starbucks and the Walmarts and the movie theaters and that?
No, I think there's a tremendous amount of connectivity and alignment with, not just efforts from, well-known individuals, but even lesser. And the whole premise around, underlying premise of what we're attempting to do is to say to folks like, hey, look, it doesn't have to be always as comprehensive as a celebrity. Even rappers are talking about buying back the block. You could Google buy back the block and about 5 or 10 hip hop songs come up. And so I think we're yeah, no, really. I mean, and that's actually a good thing. We want the message of folks who are from communities, from these neighborhoods, to not think that it has to be some significant, large federal, state, or local legislative initiative, and it's not always about hundreds of millions of dollars. There are some, if some folks would just go back to the blocks and the neighborhoods and just even collectively among families and friends, just say, hey, we're going to take this one, property, and we're going to, over time, just rehab it. And I think the other thing is that we've got to, probably not enough time in this discussion, but I hope that in a later time, you would invite individuals like Rob Rose from the Cook County Land Bank Authority, and other mechanisms that, allow citizens who have a desire to bring back some of these blighted properties back online, that there are resources. There are state, there are local, and in some cases, federal resources. And we should talk about those that actually the mission is to help spur this type of development. And that's also part of it, because, what we don't want to do with this conversation is for folks to say, well, yeah, you did that because you're a business, and no. This is that what I'm doing is not out of the realm of possibility for other people to do. And I think that's part of the other part of the message here. Like, I'm not some Superman swooping in to save. Like, no, I'm just one resource of many to try to catalyze, but there is room for everyone to get involved in this process.
So, you bring, hang on, Carl, one sec. So you bring up a really good point. One of the things I wrote down was, hey, what kind of opportunity is there? And I think you're touching on it. So there's resources and there's opportunity. Give a couple specific ideas of what somebody who maybe is not from the neighborhood, but has an interest in helping, gentrification and regrowth. Give an opportunity or two, residential, maybe commercial, that somebody could get their foot in the water, and that there's resources out there to help them do that.
So, you again, key word, you just said it. And I'm not going to go into an exhaustive explanation about it, but I'm going to put it out there. You've likely probably had a show about it, but it's definitely a ton of information out there. And one, my neighborhood, as troubled as it is and has been historically, has been designated by new federal legislation as an opportunity zone, which means there are certain incentives from a tax standpoint for high net worth individuals to actually invest, or individuals that have resources or certain funds to invest in my neighborhood and seek certain benefits, capital gains benefits. Now, that's a big deal, because that allows a new lane and door of opportunity for individuals who may not have historically deemed my neighborhood worthy of investment, but now they not only, and by the way, it's not just real estate. You can put businesses in opportunity zones, and that has certain tax implications and benefits as well. So that's one, right? The other, though, is, look, with focused, ours is, I think part of it is, I'm not just flipping properties all around. I have a very targeted sector that I'm not deviating, right, out of my sector. And in that, I feel like we can raise the comp levels of sales, and thus I can raise the level of my neighbors who are homeowners who've been hanging on there for decades, who because of the historic disinvestment, their home values and prices have not, because of all the extenuating circumstances. But now I come, bringing on a new home development that helps raise the level and value of their homes. And we're proving out the fact that, you know, based on our early sales that we're having, and this is with rehabs, this is not even with our new home development, that there is a market, right? And it is affordable. You can bring a quality housing product to these neighborhoods that have historically not had investment, that are, you know, may be defined by some as challenged. You can bring a quality home product, and there are folks who are willing to invest, and not just from an investment standpoint, but actually move in and live there. Because if I can bring the same quality housing product and stock to my neighborhood that you find in suburban Chicago, or in on the north side and other parts of the city, West Loop, etc., but at a different price point, then that's a worthwhile investment. And I think folks are going to begin. And by the way, again, I'm still transportation hub. I'm still easy access to downtown and all the transportation hub. But again, I've got to, you know, improve schools, tamp down crime. It all happens, and it's all connected together. But so far, we're proving that investing in my neighborhood is worthwhile.
Well, my daughter's friend's family, I think they're from Tennessee or Kentucky, and they bought an old brownstone. I don't know the exact address, but it's on the west side of the street. It's just south of 61st in St. Lawrence. Beautiful home, totally rehabbed it.
Yeah.
And they live there and they love it. And they, you know, I don't know them well enough to talk economics with them, but I'm sure they probably got a pretty good deal on the house. It's a huge, double lot, coach house in the back, brownstone, beautiful home. And there's several beautiful homes on that street, and they've completely gut rehabbed it, and they love it, you know. And like I said, we were just down there last night, you know, and it's, you know, there's nothing wrong with that street, you know. I mean, you know, the street is like like you said. You know, you made a point earlier, you know, we used to buy buildings. I owned about 22 buildings. We used to buy buildings. These buildings were the same buildings that were designed and built by the builders 100 years ago that were building Lincoln Park and Rogers Park and Andersonville.
Absolutely.
And Logan Square. If you took the buildings I own and just took a picture of them, you couldn't tell where it was, because it could have been in any of those other neighborhoods. And there's some really great stock, you know, property down there to be, you know, and as you mentioned, opportunities.
Yeah, and look, you know, I think if every one of your listeners is not aware, they should be aware that a presidential center will be built in Woodlawn, just short of where, about a mile, which is walking or bike riding or running distance away from the front door of my childhood home, which is a target of our area. And that presidential center will be a boom to not only Woodlawn and Hyde Park, but I think to the entire south side of Chicago. But even with that coming, I don't think that folks should totally depend on that alone, right? I think folks have to, you know, more folks have to do what I'm doing to ensure that that investment does extend to areas and goes very much beyond the immediate target area of where the presidential center will be. And I hope to be in alignment with that catalytic moment and investment with the work that we're doing on the west side of Woodlawn.
And any idea when that is supposed? And let me just real quick say, if any of our listeners have questions, throw them in the chat, and we'll get Lamell to answer any questions you might have. What's been the delay, and any expected, you know, are they any closer to getting that off the ground now, that presidential center?
Yeah, I hope and pray so. For me, it's I'm an avid golfer, so I'm looking to not just the revival or the building of the new presidential center, but I'm hoping that the proposed Tiger Woods renovation of the Jackson Park golf course, which is near my house, also happens, because that too, bringing and making that a world-class facility where possible tournaments can occur is a big deal, just as big as, you know, having this global presidential center where millions of visitors will visit from around the world. I don't know the timetable. The good thing, it is slated to go in that part of Woodlawn, across the street from High Park High School. I know the foundation is working diligently every day, but it's incumbent to me and others to not depend on that alone, but to do our part to help spur and be a part of the renaissance of the Woodlawn community as well.
Yeah.
So that's great. Someone sent the question. And I know this because I know that neighborhood, but a lot of our listeners are, they're looking at buying maybe their first or their second 2-flat or 4-flat or 6-flat.
Sure.
Right? So the question is, is there a good stock of smaller buildings, for someone that may be just getting started, that was looking at a 2 or 4 or 6-flat? What do you have to say about that in the areas that you're talking about?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I think those that, are currently operating with tenants, but especially those that need to be brought back online and need a little TLC, that are worthy of rehab and investment. And yeah, there's a quite a bit of a good stock of that. And there's unfortunately in my neighborhood, there's still an overwhelming abundance of vacant land inventory. And so just as folks think that, a 2-flat, a small multifamily building, 4 to 6 unit building, it may be deemed worthy, perhaps to be considered is the acquisition of vacant land, which in my neighborhood is also zoned for multifamily units. Perhaps some of your listeners and viewers would consider being a part of that investment pool as well.
Where can they? Where is there a city program? You mentioned the land bank, and actually, Ron spoke at one of our Southside Builders luncheons, or somebody from that department. But where is there someplace you could direct our listeners that maybe where they can maybe source or find some of those 2 to 4 to 6 flats? Are there some resources out there that someone can take a look at?
I would definitely encourage your listeners to go to the Cook County Land Bank Authority's website. It, in addition to clearly articulating their mission and showing examples of and giving the prerequisites for working with them, they also list an inventory of properties around the city and in their neighborhoods like mine, where you can do negotiated sales. And then you should, the city of Chicago. There's a process that the city of Chicago has, either through the Troubled Buildings Department or et cetera, where you can do negotiated sales with the city of Chicago. We found in our initial foray into what we're doing in my neighborhood that the Cook County Land Bank Authority is a phenomenal resource, and they've been a wonderful partner for folks like us who are, newer developers who are trying to bring blighted properties back online.
And they can just Google that, right? It's just a place they can go
Cook
to.
Cook County Land Bank Authority. Hey, Carl, I wish I was that good that I knew the website offhand, but it's Cook County Land Bank Authority.
We'll figure it out.
Absolutely.
I just put it in the chat, so if anybody's interested, they can.
Yeah, they'll definitely get it for sure.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
So what's next for you and your team?
Yeah, it is between 63rd and that what we call that west side quadrant of Woodlawn, 63rd to 71st King Drive, the Cottage. We're going to continue to acquire as many properties that need to be rehabbed and as much vacant land as possible in that sector, where we can bring on new home ownership models and begin to revive the neighborhood. And look, just as much as we're doing on the real estate development, I'm very much pouring into organizations like the YWCA of Chicago, like Sunshine Gospel Ministries, like Project Hood, all in my neighborhood doing good work, because this has to be collaborative. It has to be as many people as possible doing and supporting, you know, the YWCA services, women and children. And they have a tech and innovation center, by the way, that I've invested in. It's across the street from my childhood home. And you'll see the marquee. It's called the Bertha McMorris Technology and Innovation Center. That Bertha McMorris just happens to be my mom. And so we're excited about the collaboration and the partnership that we have. I serve on the board of Sunshine Gospel Ministries in my community. I work very closely with Corey Brooks, the pastor in the neighborhood, who has Project Hood, who's doing a phenomenal job with what you're saying, you know, the apprenticeships, teaching people trades and skills in my neighborhood. And so, you know, that you know, Emmett Till School, which used to be McCosh Elementary School, which was my grammar school, walking distance. We've got a garden of healthy food. We've helped them get a grant to expand that garden. That's what's got to continue, Mike and Carl. I mean, it is a constant, everyday presence. I've got to get brothers off the corner, and I've got to get them skills. I've got folks on my block who are actually working on our new construction on the block where we're doing it. It's all hands on deck, and I'm just going to continue like pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Just continue as best I can to keep exploring and discovering new ways to, you know, because sometimes we get so caught up in the work that we do, and we're looking so far outside. Sometimes some of the answers that we need are right under our nose, and some of the resources and the people to help execute and build and rebuild my neighborhood. I think I'm going to do it as best I can with the folks who are there.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, one of the things that you and I have had this conversation before is that it didn't get that way overnight.
That's
And
right.
so to make the change isn't something that happens overnight either, that it
Absolutely.
takes time, and it's that one lot at a time, that one building at a time, that one person at a time, right? If we can make a difference in one person's life and the destiny with their life, it becomes sustainable. So, and I think that that's a big word, right? Is how do we make this sustainable? And for generational results, right? So it's a turnaround that I think that, like you said, and early on, back to the beginning of this show, it's not just you, but it's got to be a team of people, and it's got to be a lot of people who are involved on the same mission. So, and I think it's great that there's the opportunity there for people to get involved. Like Carl mentioned, you know, him and I both have owned, you know, a lot of units down there and a lot of buildings. And I think that, you know, for somebody who wants to get involved, that, you know, small multifamilies, that's a great, and one of the things I'm an advocate of is you could create great wealth in the small multifamily sector, but somebody go down there and build something could, you know, renovate something that's already existing. There's a lot of opportunity, and when you get a handle on how much opportunity, it really makes a difference for how you start to view things. So,
you know, but you know, I'm sorry, Carl. I want to piggyback on what something you said, Mike, because I really want your listeners and the viewers. While I want as many people as possible to come in to my neighborhood to invest, the difference that I want them to consider is, you know, when you come into my neighborhood and you may invest and which is great, and build new homes or invest in a multifamily structure, then go over to the Y and figure out how to get engaged somehow and connected with them, or go over to Sunshine Gospel Ministries and figure out how to get. See, that's the part that's been missing. So, you know, it won't be enough for folks to simply come in and just invest and then leave. Staying or getting connected, that's how you get to sustainability.
Yeah.
That's how you build community. When you're not just a real estate developer, you're not just an investor, but you become a part of the fabric of the community. And that's what I like for people to consider when we talk about bringing these properties back online. I'm sorry, Carl.
No, I was just, while you were talking, it just reminds me of a quick story. You know, I used to own a building at 75th and Vernon. I think it was 7501 Vernon, right on the northwest corner. Beautiful yellow brick building. And
Yeah.
across the street was that the famous restaurant, Lou's and something, or I can't remember.
Army and Lou's.
Yeah, I don't think they're there anymore. I think they.
No, it's
Mm.
a good example of part of the
Oh,
challenges of businesses being able to sustain. But Army and Lou's was a remarkably famous nationwide, worldwide soul food restaurant right off the corner. You said it, right off the corner of 75th and King Drive.
My building was right there, and I'll never forget this. I got a pet peeve, litter, right? I got a pet peeve. I live in the city. I walk across the river almost every day. I pick up litter. I put on a plastic glove, and literally in my path, if I find litter, I pick it up. And people look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, I just don't like litter, right? So, around that building, you'd find me, if I was going to go over there to collect rent or to check on the security or flush the boiler or whatever, I would pick up the litter, right? And it was driving me nuts. I'll never forget this. This elderly woman walked, and I was on the corner. She walked up to me, and she obviously was watching me, right? And
of course,
over a period of weeks, she walked up to me and introduced herself. I wish I could remember her name. She was the president of the 75th and Vernon homeowners block, right?
Yeah.
It was a block just south of Vernon on 75th. Beautiful homes, manicured, well taken care of, and she was in charge. She was the president of that home. And she came over and she introduced herself. She was the sweetest woman you ever want to meet. And she said, "You know what your problem is?" I said, "No." She said, "Well, everybody throws the garbage in your dumpster and they don't put it in bags. So the wind blows it out." I'm like, "Oh, okay." She said, you should buy your tenants garbage bags." I'm like, "Okay, that's a good idea," right? So she was offering a solution, right? She saw that I was concerned about it, because I didn't want my building. I don't want litter around my building. I'm sorry, I just didn't want it, right? And so, and that's what we did. And I used to buy bags. It cost, I went to the local hardware store, which was right, if you remember, was right down the street, just east of there, or just west of there on the other side of the street. And he would give me a deal on I would go by and buy a bunch of boxes of garbage bags, and I'd give them to the tenants, and it made a difference, right? And then I remember one time, she invited me to go to the restaurant. She said, "Oh, we're going to the restaurant on Sunday." She said, "On Sunday, you should come on Sunday." And I was like, "I'm going to take her up on it." And I went in there. I mean, Mike, the who's who of the neighborhood were there. I mean, people from church. There was a line out front. I went there. It was great food. And I became a regular. I would go there when the workers were there, the guys for lunch. We'd go over there. They knew my name. We tipped them we tipped the waitress as well, who'd been there for 30 years, The food was outstanding, and that was, that was just, for me, I supported the local hardware store guy, because he was, he knew what was going on. If I had a question, hey, there's a couple windows broken, he was a resource for me, right? And the woman that ran the block, she had a vested interest in that block.
Hey,
and
Carl,
it was beautiful.
Guess what? And you didn't need a city ordinance to do that.
No.
There was no major swooping legislation. Part of what we need and can do is really in our hands to make neighborhoods livable, walkable, and playable again. That's how you do it. You invest in the businesses that are there, and sometimes the solutions are just as simple as go buy your tenants some garbage bags.
Yeah. And,
no one had to send out a major memo or put something on the internet in order for that to get done.
And we had 750 tenants in our portfolio. That building had the least amount of problems. Mm-hmm. They would refer potential tenants. The lady would, I wish I remember her name, but she would refer tenants. We exchanged phone numbers. She invited me to a barbecue one time. It was phenomenal. It was great. And the
revival of the block club phenomenon is a big deal. And that is definitely part of one of our strategies, because, we believe pride is instilled, increased communication, safety is enhanced when neighbors know each other, when neighbors talk to each other, and when neighbors decide collectively that they're going to sustain their blocks and their community.
And we were the biggest building on the block. We had 18 units, and we had the biggest building. And I'm telling you, that building operated, I wish they all were like that. And I really firmly believe that part of it is because it was the anchor of that block. of citizens and of residents that really cared about their homes, and they kept an eye on things, right? And if there was a problem, she had no problem whatsoever walking up to me and telling me, giving me a solution to the problem, and I wasn't offended by it. I thanked her. I said, thank you. That's a really good suggestion, and I think that's what it takes. And I know that's what it takes.
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, listen, we are starting to press the clock here, and I know there's a couple of things that we want to talk about. One thing that I want to mention, and I heard a quote this morning that just really caught my attention. And Carl, I know you said it was my birthday, but maybe it's because of my age and where life takes us. But this quote was, "A man is not a man by his age, but by his experiences."
Yeah.
And I'm confident today that we were able to extend some experience and some knowledge from Lamell, and even our own, to our listeners and the people out there. One of the things that I think Lamell brings is he brings some opportunity, and that opportunity offers pride and leadership for people who take advantage of it. You talk about the block. The organizing of the block commissions again, and you talk about making an initiative to go down there and do what Carl did, go into the local businesses
Right.
and sit down and buy garbage bags. And it's the simple things that our shareholders, that we build into the shareholders around that real estate that we own, whether you are
Correct.
gentrifying a neighborhood or just buying something, but that's what makes the change. So build in the people. You know what? Really, we're all in the people business. And I say this, I've said this before, but I think one of the greatest books I've ever read is Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And he talks about that. He talks about being in the people business and caring about the people around us, regardless of neighborhood, regardless of race, regardless of religion, that we just care about each other, and be kind to one another. And Lamell, I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule and your life for being here this morning.
Thank you, and happy birthday, Mike.
Oh, thank you. Would you tell our listeners how they can get a hold of you if they have any interest in more knowledge down there, or joining your band, or, getting involved?
Yes. www.greenlining realty USA, all one word, www.greenliningrealtyusa.com. And my email address is Lamell, LAMELL, @greenliningrealtyusa.com.
I'll put that in the chat right now, Lamell.
Okay, great. And while you're doing that, I'm going to remind our listeners about the Multifamily Global Summit coming up in October 15th through the 17th. 3 days of networking, education, and fun. We're going to have 20 of the top real estate investment specialists from across the country and property management specialists that are going to come and talk to you about everything from small multifamily to large multifamily, and the operations and a lot of the ancillary things that go on within that. So go to the website, Multifamily Global Summit, and register for the event. It's an event that you're not going to want to miss. Carl, thanks for being here again, making it a wonderful Saturday morning. Lamell, again, very much thank you. I can't tell you from the bottom of my heart for you being here today and all you've shared and your kindness. And Carl, look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, and one last thing, Mike, I want to make sure I get this right, Lamell. Your email is LAMELL @greenliningrealtyusa.com.
Exactly. You got it right. I saw it in the chat. Yep.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Carl. Thanks, Mike.
You bet.
Take care.